Welcome everyone, and thanks so much for being with us for the launch of So-Lair Storm. My name is Jared Daniel Fagen. I am the editor and publisher of Black Sun Lit, a small literary publisher of transgeneric poetry and ontological inquiry founded in 2012 and based in Brooklyn and the Western Catskills of New York. We really do have a truly special evening in store for all of you, a remarkable gathering of poets and translators and thinkers spanning three countries and multiple languages. Tonight's participants include the author and translator of So-Lair Storm, the Andean Chilean writer Andrés Ajens, and Montreal-based poet and translator Erín Moure, respectively, and two special guests, poet translator Michelle Gil-Montero and Canadian poet and translator Sonja Greckol. We'll begin by hearing from both Andrés and Erín, who will share a few words about the genesis of the book and their individual and relational practices, followed by bilingual reading. And afterwards, we'll move into a discussion between all our presenters, concluding the events with a Q&A, which you're all welcome to join and participate in. It is my pleasure to give the floor to Michelle, who will be sort of emceeing, introducing, and commenting and moderating tonight's festivity. So thank you, and please all join me in welcoming Michelle.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jared. It's wonderful to be here and to have you here, with here being lots of places, Pittsburgh, Montreal, Toronto, Santiago, many other places across the audience. Before I begin, I was hoping to remind us all to take some pause tonight to confront our presence in these places and their displacements, historical and ongoing, as we celebrate this amazing book that for its part challenges and dismantles colonial thinking and unthinking. Again, I'm Michelle Gil-Montero. I'm the moderator and fellow celebrant of this book. And my first full-length translation was a collection of poetic philosophical texts by Andrés Ajens, which is a work that Erín Moure, thank goodness, generously mentored me through. And in any case, my thinking about poetry and translation did not make it out of that book in one piece, and I'm forever grateful for that. So I'll begin with a few sentences of the official book description of So-Lair Storm, and then I'll just read a short introductory text to get all of the festivities underway. Poet, essayist, translator, cultural agitator, and literary activist Andrés Ajens, cult writer, hidden writer, and writer of What the Folds of History Hide, is raised from the antipodes of literature with a poetic project that stands out for both its forcefulness and its hybridity. In his diverse cultural scaffolding, Ajens combines indigenous writing and languages, the history of Western literature, post-structuralist philosophy and linguistics, manipulating geographical and scriptural boundaries, breaking down, chewing, and digesting language like no other. His is a poetry that resists not only oblivion, atrocity, and colonialism, but also translation and interpretation. When asked to introduce tonight, I thought both emphatically and doubtfully, how can I not introduce? How can I fail to introduce this collection, this collection of intranslated inductions to an experience of reading that slips and spills over our Western literary categories, splits and spits past confines and singularities, multilingual, mixed up with too many legs, tongues, a monstrous thing that resists the norms and names of poem and translation and even literature. How can I not introduce this book that I can't name or norm? How can I not collect my thoughts and welcome you all to the lair of such a monstrous text? When I attempt to name this work, I think back to an essay that Ajens has written on other experimental multilingual works, including El Pez de Oro by Gamaliel Churata. He writes, "For a monster, no possible name would be its own, and so it demonstrates the shipwreck of the norm. Let's call it aguayo." In the Aymara language, an aguayo is a textile, an Andean cloak, a shawl. In Spanish, the word is a mix-up that ties agua, water, to the pronoun yo, I, a watery I, a fluid first person, Texts like this, Aguayos, are translations from the start, in the sense that they shatter our illusion of monoglossic completion and consensus. They are a disruption, a storm that slithers out of its lair and breaks the sky, a solar storm that disrupts our heedless communicative frequencies, rattles our grids. In Shakespeare's Tempest, there is a moment when Trinculo stumbles on Caliban behind a cloak. Is it a man or fish, he wonders when he hears a clap of thunder and jumps with him under the cloak. Stefano walks over and notes 4 legs and 2 voices, a most delicate monster, and they all get drunk. That strange Aguayo, born of mix-up, kerfuffle, and colonial invasion of space, strikes me as a possible ancestor of translations such as this one, a delicate hybrid with 4 legs, 2 voices, and a manifestation all its own, capable of embodying both the violence of colonialism and the beauty of contradiction. Erín Moure translates this multilingual, multicultural textile with deft, inventiveness, nuance, and resonance. Her approaches are multiple and necessary. She translates, responds, intervenes, deviates, and invents, resulting in a work that remains as intrinsically open, generative, and undecided as it was at the start. It's hard to resist the tendency of a translation to pin a work down, to resolve its aporias. But here, Moure has participated and elucidated without narrowing possibilities or settling the unsettling ground. To the contrary, the shaky terrain has broadened, the crack has traveled north, all the way to the Elbow River of Alberta and all places this translation travels. I'll read their bios briefly, and then I'll hand it over to Erín and Andrés. Andrés Ajens is an Andean Chilean writer, author of 15 books of poetry, creative nonfiction, and translation. In poetry, his most recent titles are La Huaca Húmera, published in 2022, and Cúmulo Lúcumo. In creative nonfiction, La Golondrina Húmera y otros poemas de Paul Celan. He has translated Pessoa, Bop, Guimarães Rosa, and others. He currently coordinates the magazine of poetry and related herbals, Mar con Soroche, in Santiago and La Paz. He currently coordinates, I read that part, and teaches Indian literature and textualities in the Ex-Pedagogical Center of the University of Chile in Santiago. Canadian poet Erín Moure brought a selection of his early poetry into English as Quasi Flanders, Quasi Extremadura, 2001-2008, and his book of essays, La Flor del Exterminio, appeared in English as Poetry After the Invention of America, Don't Light the Flower, translated by me, Palgrave Macmillan, 2011. Erín Moure is a poet and translator with 18 books of poetry, a co-authored book of poetry, a volume of essays, a book of articles on translation, a poetics, and 2 memoirs. She has translated or co-translated 21 books of poetry and 2 of biopoetics from French, Spanish, Galician, Portuguese, and Ukrainian into English by poets such as Nicole Brossard, Andrés Ajens, Chantal Neveu, François Turcot, Rosalia de Castro, Chuspato, and others. She also translates poetry from Galician and English into French. 3 of her own books in English have appeared in translation, 1 each, in German, Galician, and French. And her latest is The Elements from NSC 2019, and Theophylline, an Aporetic Migration, which appeared in 2023. Erín, would you please share with us something of the story of this book? We know that it's been long in coming, and we've been excited to get it.
Well, it's a really thrilling thing to have the book be published and working with. I just want to thank Jared first of all for seeking out this work and for wanting to publish it, and just for being a great guy to work with to put things all together. It made everything very easy and non-stressful, and that's great. And to Andrés especially, we've been working together for a long time, and without Andrés, I wouldn't be able to translate the works. I'm fluent in French and Galician besides English, but not quite as fluent in Spanish and in South American and Chilean Spanish and history. I'm even less fluent and fluid. So without Andrés sharing some of his blood supply with me through the internet, I wouldn't have been able to do it. In any case, I met Andrés in 1999, so 25 years ago, in Cambridge, UK, at a small international poetry festival that ran over a weekend. And Lisa Robertson was in Cambridge then as on a visiting fellowship. And it was her who'd brought my name into the mix. That's, I think, must have been why I was there. And it was an amazing year, though. We heard readings from Michel Deguy, Christian Prigent, Christophe Tarkos, Lisa Robertson, Andrea Brady, Michael Palmer, and others. There were Australian, Irish, French, English, Canadian, and American poets reading. And Ajens read alongside Tarkos on the Sunday afternoon, billed as a French poet, though his French sounded strangely Spanish to me. I read later that same evening with Michel Deguy, the venerable French poet and translator who was then the same age that I am now. And after that final reading, I at last met Andrés. I didn't speak Spanish and he didn't speak English, and neither of us realized at that moment that we both spoke French. So we admired each other's work in a kind of gestural vocabulary of enthusiasm. I remember Andrés, we did a kind of dance and waving to indicate that we appreciated each other's work. The next day after the conference, visiting Lisa, I saw Andrés' book, Mas Intimas Mistura, from 1998, and I opened it, and a world opened to me. I realized from its denting of Spanish and its word fracturations and spacings that it was a great work of world poetic art. And so just as when Elisa Sampedrin opened the works of Nikita Stănescu, not knowing Romanian, and saw real cows standing in a real field steaming, I saw real poetry in this book that I could not yet read, really. Anyways, Lisa was so surprised at my joy that she just gave me the book. And all this happened, it was before internet translators and AI, and the web was a lot less commercial than today, but very much less replete, and very dominated by English as well, which it isn't as much today. Having access to this poetry of Andrés Ajens was something not to be taken for granted. And of course, I had to translate something of this work so that I could read him and share my amazement. And so we emailed each other at first in French. And once we discovered that we both spoke French, and then for over 2 decades, Andrés has helped me greatly in translating a few works at a time from that book and from others. And to that first chapbook that Michelle mentioned, gradually were added other texts, encouraged by Juliana Spar and Gina Osmond of Chain in particular, and by the late rabble-rouser and thrower of poetic itching powder, Kent Johnson, among others. Andrés and I continued to write and speak in Galician and Spanish and French and bits of English, Andrés in bits of Aymara, for he had much to explain to me about literature, really opening my eyes. And then Michelle later translated about a decade ago his book of essays, which I helped her edit for American Eyes and Ears, and a wonderful Rachel Blau DuPlessis published in her series with Palgrave Macmillan. It's still available, and it's still a wonderful book. And Forrest Gander wrote the introduction with me, because Forrest is also an enthusiast of Andrés' work. And then the time went by. Mina Pam Dick, the New York, Montreal poet, connected me to Jared Fagen of Black Sun Lit, an upstart and daring press I really admired, and I was thrilled that Jared was interested in publishing something, and whatever I had that was the hardest, the most challenging. That's what he wanted to see. So I didn't send him my limericks. I sent him Andrés, and that's how the book came to be, So-Lair Storm. So to me, So-Lair Storm, even though the work itself can be considered experimental work, it's not an experimental translation, but it's my work to represent as faithfully as possible the intricate and layered work of Andrés Ajens, the variety of his endeavor and textual practice. The experience and optics of a Southern Hemisphere writer and an anti-poet, really, are not easy or obvious to translate into our Northern cultures without colonizing them. So translation was an arduous but necessary effort to let Ajens speak as Ajens, but in English. even if the result means that he can't quite get rid of me as translator. And I thank again Andrés, the most patient poet in the world, I think of him as, for all his comments and reflections over a quarter of a century. And I thank too, in memory, our shared friend, Kent Johnson, that big bear of a Uruguayan-born American poet who loved Ajens' work and who understood the differences between South and North very well. One of the things that that many, I think, American poets just familiar with the North didn't see in Kent, but that was definitely there. I'm just going to quote a bit from my introduction to the book, and then read one poem in my English to kind of introduce you to the style and the narrational things that are at stake with Ajens' practice. Anyways, my quote here, Ajens from myself: Ajens is a space where poetry, Ajens' space is a space where poetry hears as something else at work in language. In this listing, he calls upon many ancestral interlocutors. The colonial and intra-colonial meet his own decolonial apothecary, in which we find Aymara works alongside Europeans and settlers from Europe, such as Mallarmé, Solán, Borges, and others. Ajens' displacements addition, adentate, ahendar. At the same time, they're always so intricate. His linguistic turns and explosions are repeatedly minor in the Deleuzian sense of a minor language, and unmake language, the language of consensus. Ajens is not a rhetor, not a personalist, and not a jokey guy. He sees philosophy as part of poetry and penetrates deeply into the ways language vocables and histories are used. His ways open other possible futures in poetry, open a path to futures where imagination is not exhausted by its own performance, where peoples are not exhausted, where history is alive, and where the poetic itself as Western extractive product is transgressed in order to affirm poetry's memorial power. And I'll just read one little poem just in the English. In the Spanish, it's called Poema Libro. The word for in Spanish for book also has the word for liberty or freedom in it, which doesn't in English, so I translated it as Poem Livre. A-narrative poetry newly peers in from apart is the A-news in poetry, writing an impetuous reading. The narrator narrates niftily what took place, too late, as if outside it had rained stars or graph-osculated self-printing. It's A-narrated. When ciphered and vice versa, white page, bright triggers, the impaled palette in the acclimatized dust-up aguayo. Here, no interpretation via Aristotle is of use. Thus, by its own inconceivable weight, poetry, a narrative and or narrator, even in its bits and disjunctions, is word obscenic. If there is too much rose in the prose, we say frankly, orbe certino, and still recall much of the too much gobble of the untranslatish joker, the epic, intimate, El Cid style, furious, or blue Mapuche hen, safe as a bell, la terra aperta, no longer rings out. A narrative is amoralicious. Off the embassy poem, hold the show, brush the thing off, give the all clear without firing up plot.
For that, and I was going to ask Andrés for the southern side of this beautiful long collaboration.
I would like to say just forward in this occasion, 8 syllables. I mean, thanks, north-south, So-Lair Storm, and Yapa. The first syllable, thanks. And to try to give thanks by saying thanks, I will quote a little passage from Little Theaters by Erín Moure, Erín, on the cover of the book of 2005, a passage in a poem whose name is precisely in Galician, Agradecimento. I quote, "If I want to speak to birds, should I use Latin or Latin, my mother's idiom or yours? My mother's idiom she invented on arrival, or aturusus calados, oídos en ningures, oídos desde aquí." The mystery of this agradecimiento and its aturusus calados is no mystery. O único misterio é haver quem pense no mistério, as Alberto Caeiro Pessoa remarks in his poems, which Erín and I translated at the same time without knowing that the other was translating the same at the same time in 2000. The second word is a composite, north-south, with an hyphen in between. It has 2 syllables, 10 letters, and beyond letters and literature in the strict sense, a subletter mark, an hyphen. It is a recurring motif in So-Lair Storm, a motif, something in motion, both in Erín's note and footnote, and in some of my footnotes too, and in some poem too. And it also appeared once in French as Nord-Sud, in a note that evokes the name of the avant-garde poetic magazine founded in Paris by Vicente Huidobro and Pierre Reverdy in 1917. We could add North and South by Elizabeth Bishop, who is also evoked in So-Lair Storm, to this truly endless list of expression like this. It remained that in the West at least, or at least in many Western language, that the North-South pair entails or implies an implicit hierarchy. When we say, for example, in Quebec French, in Paris French, but it is the same in Spanish, in Santiago or Madrid. Nous ne devons pas perdre le nord. Literally, we must not lose the north, not lose one's spirit. The north indicates there the orientation, the conscience, the meaning. Nobody say, nous ne devons pas perdre le sud. If the north indicates orientation, meaning, conscience, what does the south indicate there? The non-significant, the body, the signifier as opposed to the meaning, the irrational. And this doesn't just happen in the north, of course. As Vicente Huidobro say, in Chile, the 4 cardinal points are 3, north and south. Following Huidobro, we could say that Spanish indicate north, and some of the indigenous language, which in another, south, and so on. Because, for example, in the Andean tradition, the north is usually also marked hierarchically over the south, as one poem confirmed, circa 1616. Chinchaysuyo over Collasuyo, the north of Cusco over the south of Cusco. But north-south, this linking term, thanks to the small hyphen, as in So-Lair, also marks something else, a meridian between Montreal and Santiago. Maybe. Both places share quasi exactly the same meridian, and this is exactly between Montreal and Concepcion, my so-called homeland, as if the little hyphen between north and south were actually a very long dash, as if to say a meridian line. A meridian maybe remains something very unique and strange. With Paul Celan, we know that it is above all about unpredictable, unintentional encounters. On the one hand, it's named what is southern, meridional, and at the same time, it's named what links what is southern to what is northern. What happened as this meridian in So-Lair Storm? Not only inversion occurred, north, south, and vice versa, also in various surprising ways. Not only the hierarchical relationship is reversed, but often all hierarchy is decapitated, giving rise to difference without hierarchy. We will see. The third word is more than one composite and the other sample. So-Lair Storm. What's lair? I asked myself since I didn't know the meaning of this English word the first time I read this title by Erín Moure. So I went to the Penguin Dictionary and read lair. 1. The resting or living place of a wild animal. 2. A refuge or place for hiding, a den. So if lair is 2, the home of an animal, what kind of animal could it be? A penguin, maybe. The only animal that has come out to meet us so far in the Penguin Dictionary. A southern animal, a meridional, a bird that lives on land and fly in the sea. Maybe a chili willy, you say? Maybe not. It is supposed to live in the extreme north, to be born in the Arctic. But who knows? Maybe this lair belongs to a southern penguin lost in translator, or better, migrating north. A penguin, a penguin, because without impeding semantic translation, the Erín translation also operate at the syllabic phonic embodied level. So we can also hear the air, the Erín air, the French lair from Montreal too, where in So-Lair Storm, of course. And we can breathe once more, to translate it in Pessoa language, maybe a solar temporal, a temporal solar. We arrive now at the last word, the last 2 syllables, Yapa. Yapa is a Quechua and Aymara word, both Andean languages, not only in a geographical sense, is andante one, and usually means extra help, free addition, something gratis or a gift. It must remain undecided or open whether it is a gift that enters into the economy of gift and their gift, or if it is a present that escapes temporarily any economy. This yapa passes into Spanish, and then along unclear path, and not without small transformation, like a meridional migrant penguin maybe, to the far north, first to Louisiana, later to Canada. In So-Lair Storm, it came only once as such, in Agramont Montagnaglia, on page 78. Erín gives us her translucine in the hands, line up. In Laugh on the Mississippi, Mark Twain said, we picked up one excellent word, a word line up. So in closing, I would like to give you a lanyap, not to say lanyap, but give you one. And a turusu, as the one Erín evokes in agradecimiento. An a turusu calado, an acute, a mute cry of joyful, an intense, remote, and soundless cry of pleasure. So, leer an atarusu calado. So, thanks again to all of you, and especially to Jared and Black Sunlit, the publishing house, and at least in some sense, our hospitable lair this evening.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. I know that we would love to hear from the book in bilingual dialogic format. And so would Andrés begin, or would you like to begin, Erín?
But I think Andrés will begin. We have a little list of poems to read you from the book, which we hope you'll enjoy. And Andrés will read the Spanish first, his original first, so you can get some idea of the sounds. If you can't understand the words, you can at least understand the sounds, the storm of sounds that are in the poem. So, Andrés, do you want to start with?
Okay. Quijote en pausa. ¿Qué hace a Quijano querer volver a torear a Ulises una y otra vez y errar, sin pausa vuelto a aborigen, mancha invención, gala occitana u oxímoron, con filo a la vez tal vez, desmantible la puente, disparates dispares, fisgas al guión real, de plumífera cara entre taquis a su sansa Quijano inca de puma tambo. Camina el autor en pausa. Si Kafka vuelve al Quijote, su pai, ein Teufel de Sancho, al Inca vuelve Guamampoma Sancho de su majestad, el guión real, en pausa.
Thanks, Andrés. No, this poem, it's if you have the book, it's on page 32 and 33. Quixote in pausa, paused. What makes Quijano want to go back to bullfighting Ulysses over and over again and ramble unpaused back to his native La Mancha? Invention, Occitan, Gala, or oxymoron, with a hint of alavis, perhaps, of mantible, i.e., the bridge. Disparate shots dispersed, lamb blast in the imperial guidon, face downy betwixt his own tacky jigs, Quijano Inga de Pomatambo? Is the author's promenade in pausa? If Kafka gives back to Don Quixote Sancho's souper ein Teufel, Guaman Poma gives back to the Inca Sancho in his majesty the imperial guidon in pausa, which requires a footnote. Pausa is in Peru, and pausa is paused too, plausibly and plausibly. There is no justification for such impishness here. It is serious. Laugh. Takis song dance from Quechua to Castilian is Europe's tacky jig, maybe, or just here. And the reference is to Relación de las fiestas que se celebraron en la Corte de Pausa. Report on the holidays celebrated in the court at Pausa. Anonymous. Perinacochas, Guamanga, Virreinato del Peru, 1607. So that's.
Bien. Irrevocable caudalítico. ¿Qué haces otra vez aquí, fraserío, desprolijo, no con tu nombre, ni renombre milenario, taipicala con el rocío sino de tus sílabas pétreas, ni añorar arañar al presente desde la puerta, donde el arqueo poeta proclamara que rodaban cabezas como flores de los 4 rincones del mundo en temporadas secas. Rocío es sin vuelta frase, río por venir piedragua con jugándose a tientas.
So that irrevocably flowing. What are you doing here again, phraseries so unkempt, not with your name nor millennial fame, taipi, kala, with the dew, but with your stony syllables? Not yearning nor scraping in presenting from the door where the arch-poeted proclaim that heads rolled like flowers from the four corners of the world in seasons of drought. Dew is without return, phraseries yet to come, stone water with all that groping around.
Yacalaica Pichitanca. Violeta Parra escribió en Bolivia, gracias a la vida del 66, marcar territorio para que ninguna changuita le levantara al gringo Fabre. Y el es al hombre que yo amo, y la voz tan tierna de mi bien amado, y la casa tuya, tu calle, tu patio, cuando miro al fondo de tus ojos claros. Violeta Parra escribió en la Peña Naira, gracias a la vida, el 86, y de La Paz se trajo el revólver Tigre, que acabó con todo a las 6 de la tarde. ¿Cómo volver de La Paz y no arrasar? ¿Cómo no volver a Chuquillapumarca? ¿Cómo no domar al tigre ni marcar territorios y vivir para cantarla? El canto de ustedes, la capichitanca, que es el mismo canto que una latruquista, y el canto de todos, Malurahuistu Putagua, que es mi propio canto, Sasausi, paella trasluciendo, paella recalando la breva testa, un zampoñero de marca, en la carpa de la reina en los 60, y cuando alguien la llamaba, respondía, mar con Bolivia y sí, Violeta Parra. Gracias a la vida, la capichitanca con nazlatquista.
Thanks, Andres. That's great. I'm just going to read this. This poem in my version is still called Yaka Leika Pichitanka. And there is a note at the end of the book, which I'm going to read first, just because it's harder. It'll make it easier for just listening to the poem. So Yaka Leka Pichitanka, the title of the poem, is an Aymara expression meaning, in Spanish, says Andrés, otra pájara hechicera. In English, another witch healer bird. Or to speak more plainly, another freaky chick. The freaky chick in question, Violeta Parra, wrote the song Gracias a la Vida, which we all have heard a million times, in 1966, and took her own life by gunshot in 1967 in despairing love for Gilbert Favre. Bolivia still claims the seashore that Chile took after the War of the Pacific in 1879 to 1883, when it was made to sign it away. All this of danger and bewitchings and borders. So the poem in English, Yaka Leka Pichitanka, Violeta Parra, man you scribbling in Bolivia, gracias a la vida, in 66, to stake out ground so's no babe'd blag off with her gringo Favre. And in the crowds, the man I love, and my beloved's voice so tender, and the house that's yours, your street, your garden, and when I look deep into your blue eyes, in 66, Violeta Parra wrote Gracias a la Vida in the Peña Neira, and from La Paz brought her tiger pistol that put an end to it all at 6 p.m. How to come back from La Paz and not destroy, how not to go back to Chuquiyapu Marca, how to neither tame the tiger nor stake out ground and live to sing it. Your song for all, Leka Pichitanka, is it the same song still? Kunat Lachukista, and everyone's song, Malurawix to Putawa. My very song it is too, Sasa, yes, to go on translating, to go on claiming the fruit of the shore, as Amponia, player from the Marca, claims that in the Carpa de la Reina in the 60s, when someone called for her, she'd answer, "Sí in Bolivia." Oh, sí, Violeta Parra, gracias a la vida, Leka Pichitanka, Leka Pichitanka, Kunatslach Ukista.
Gremont, montaña agria. Amontona esta montaña, este monte, río inmerso en palabras y palabras, sí, clavas y sílabas en lo alto deletreadas. Conversa allende aquén del silabario. ¿Qué no dice? Un aire mita a mita, tornamonta, vadea, desbarata. Yimani, yampu y yapa, como entre comillas, sausiux, samay, pata.
Again, Andrés, he uses words just to say in Aymara or in Quechua, and they interrupt the Spanish poem, so they have to interrupt the English poem too. But on the English side, I put the translation in footnotes. Agramont, Mount Bitter. Muster this mountain, this mount stream outpour of vocables and vocables, yes, syllables and syllables in el alto, dispelled, converse beyond the reach of syllabary. Mum's the word, in mid-air, the mid of spin clambers, wades in, disinterrupts. Iyamani, Iyampu, Ilaganapi, comma in quote marks, Sasosi, Arg, Same Pita. And the first Sasosi is Aymara for as was said, and Same Pata, Quechua for rest on high. And El Alto is the height, is the on high.
Neruda y Emma. Como sin cómo, a pura hambre incomparable, Raquel y Neftalí se cruzan en un pasaje del libro de Jonás desierto por escribir. Vómito de tan insólito mítico pez, Jonás orilla a la orilla, los ve venir, ahí está Raquel, ahí Neftalí me aburrí, de la chascona confiesa de golpe chiripa al ciervo. Jamás, Neftalí, soñé con estarme aquí. Como sin cómo, Ema y Neruda, Nerudiema, Sérvida, Abatís.
Neruda and Emma, alike without likeness, hunger, hustle, beyond compare. Rachel and Naphtali cross paths in a passage of the book of Jonah, deserted, unwritten. Upchucked by that unusual mythical fish, Jonah skirts the shore, sees them arrive. There, Rachel, there, Naphtali. The shambles bored me silly, he bursts out. The deer squeals, never, Naphtali, did I dream I'd end up here. Alike without alike, Emma and Neruda, Nerud Emma, endearing, down-trapped. And I'll read there's a long note to that because in the north, we need more information. Emma Villezon was a bright light of the rising Andean generation of poets and partner of Andrés. She died suddenly of a stroke on a winter's day in August 2015 at 34 in the El Alto airport in Bolivia, which was the country of her birth. Raquel and Naphtali, while biblical, are also Villezon's middle name and one of Neruda's. Neruda's Santiago city house, La Chascona, the Shambles, is now a museum. Naphtali, which means my struggle in Hebrew, is often represented by a hind or deer. Rachel means you and was one of the wives of Jacob, father of Naphtali. So though they are not directly related, Rachel is older than Naphtali. Ajens wrote this poem for a tribute to Villezon at La Chascona in August 2018. And then I name Emma Villezon's books, Fábulas de una caída, Lumbre con ciervos, y Temporarías y otros poemas. Thank you. It's important to that Emma has a place.
Well, de las tierras bajas, de las tierras pagos insulares confines de un condado córneo, de otro también de un guerrero descabezado con la moral en la plaza y otro allende Quilicura, Flandes, casi Extremadura. Al cabo de hornos se envela por venir, a lo que no haya nombre, a la tierra del fuego la vista, yo destruyo la rosa que silba casi. Tú que bajas ahora hacia arriba, no sin cierta fatiga, ven a estrellarte, ven a flamear sin aire.
So this is back to one of the earlier poems that I translated. From the lowlands, low neath the lands, nether regions, confines of a rock Hornish shire, of another too, of a war maker beheaded with La Morelle in the square, and another beyond Quilicura, quasi Flanders, quasi extra Madura. At Cape Horn, on the lookout to come to that which finds no name, to Tierra del Fuego, its scene, I ruin the whistling rose, Kazi. You who go down now up to the top, not without some fatigue, come star deck yourself, come blaze with me, without air. And the note for Northerners, the whistling rose and fatigue are Neruda. The rose is always Paul Celan's, no one's. No wonder I'm tired and without air and still going up. South Chile and its conquerors, querer, error, what is beyond each of us. There's scarcely room for a rose. The sky's too big and oxygen feeds fires. Without air, then we won't burn out, just blaze up briefly. Dream horses.
Then, ruinas de Pachacamac. laiqueando en lo agenciador del mundo, en ruinas, una dicha leyéndose mucho después de su grafía. El oráculo resuena imperioso hoy en inglés, meridianamente incomprensible. Do not throw toilet paper on the floor, sobre todo en ruinas. En lo esencial que no hay, huaca y poema operan económicamente, don por don, potlatch de ocasión, el espacio-tiempo de la huaca, pero que dicha sea de paso, puede ser él y aún lo huaca, dado que Chuaymaran huaca, generosidad no predetermina, y del poema que no hay, se estira y os estrecha, allende su facturación en ruinas, allende su artefacer en sacrifacto asterisco ahora, que chirapa en esta paz de una sola línea, poema y huaca desmárcanse en tácita entre urdidura jirón, de aguayo hollando, sin hallarse del todo impagable pago itinerario, don de Andes, a quien del don, la doña, la huaca, delante.
Thanks, Andres. Ruins at Pachacamac. Latka shaking in the agenciator of the world in ruins, a poem reading itself over and over, right from its scribble. The oracle resounds imperiously today in English, meridianly incomprehensible. Do not throw toilet paper on the floor, especially in ruins. In the essential, there isn't. Might huaca and poem operate economically, gift for gift, potlatch even? The space-time of the huaca, but what destiny, even fleeting, can be the and even of the huaca? From the Quechua-Mara huaca, where generosity is not at stake, and the poem that not is pulled forth and or tautened beyond its ruined billing, just short of its art fashioning sacrifictal asterisk, now that it liquid sunshines in this piece of a single line, poem and huaca being demarcated in tacit mid-warp wisp from Dutch cloth, without being seen as totally unremittable cinerary payment, gift of Andes, just short of gift, sir, rift, ma'am, huaca, and Andy. And my note here, Ajens traces the lineage of poetry itself in the South Americas as Aymara, Quechua, huaca, gift, the totally unrepayable gift. See as essays don't light the flower to learn more of the huaca. That liquid sunshine so prettily in the piece of a single line appears in poem 22 of Vallejo's Trilce, Chirapa having entered Peruvian Spanish from Quechua, liquid sunshine, a sun shower, and poem 22 also being a poem of presence, a poem of the Hemi, of Vallejo's Peruvian indigeneity, or else, I'm here. Thank you, Andrés Ajens, and thank you for listening, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you. What an incredible privilege it is to hear you read together. What a waka it is to hear you read together. I know we would like to open it up to questions in the audience, and I have Sonja Greckol with us as the co-moderator of the Q&A. So I'll introduce Sonja really briefly, and then we'll open it up to questions. But if you want to start thinking of questions and putting them in the chat, also we can stop the recording and have the questions with cameras if you prefer. So we're very lucky to have Sonja. Sonja lives in Toronto and has published 4 poetry books, Monitoring Station in 2023 from the University of Alberta Press, as well as No Line in Time, Skein of Days, and Gravity Matters. Her translation, Dark Matters of Rosia Cerrón's Materia Oscura, appears in La Prensa, and she edits poetry for Women and Environments International. So why don't we open it up to questions, and please raise your hand or put your questions directly in the chat, and I will read them out loud for you if you prefer.
Yeah, okay. Joy wrote a note.
It's not a question, she clarifies.
No, it's not a question. I could go back to the beginning of that. What did I put? Another witch healer bird. Yeah.
Another freaky chick.
Yeah, freaky chick.
Well, Sonia, I know, and I both have questions. So, Sonia, if you want to jump in while we wait for people to gather their thoughts, we can do that.
First, I want to express my just complete, unbridled joy in reading this book. It is such a perfect match between writer and translator. There's a kind of erudition in both of you that is very exciting and very thrilling. So with some embarrassment, I just have to talk about how excited I was to read across the two, the Spanish and the translation. It's just so much fun. But I guess I wanted to ask a specific question that arises in the E/and at the end of that section. And it ends with, we only translate between languages we do not master. And I'd be interested to have both Andreas and Erín comment on that line.
Oh, this is no más traducimos entre lenguas que no dominamos.
So it comes at the end of a section where it's another one of the poems that is immensely thick in terms of all of its references. But at the same time that it presents us with this thickness, it gives us all kinds of signposts that keep us grounded in the poem. But I think that that's central to the way both of you think about poetry and think about language. So I'm wondering if you can say more about that.
It's at the end of a poem, which is very long, called Cantos y Escopeta, Poems and Guns in Spanish, and Cantos and Escopeta in English. And the last stanza in English is, as for Neruda in translation, the guy not only translates from French and English, languages he more or less grasped. He studied French in Teachers College in Macul and English on his early age and travels, but largely from languages that were all but foreign to him, such as Turkish, Polish, German, and Romanian. As has been confirmed in an assertion by a Derocan Huidobroan arch rival, we only translate between languages we do not master. Well, none of us master language. I mean, language, to me, language uses us. We don't. Mastering language is a kind of a, you could say it, but it doesn't make any sense. Let's put it that way. Language lets you say that, but it doesn't make any sense. None of us master language.
Yeah. No one masters a language. But in this case, the situation evoked is a case race because Neruda supposed to translate from Turkish, Romanian, or some language that how it was. But in any case, the sovereignty or soberanía on the language, on a language, is impossible and in this not desirable. But usually we hear expression like in Spanish, yo manejo esta lengua. I drive a language, or manejo like a car, you know. But it's the same idea of domination or to be master of a language.
I wonder if that illusion, having flown out the window for you, just enables you to even, you know, you mentioned earlier that you don't feel that confident with your Spanish compared with Galician, compared with French. And I think this is the hardest Spanish I could ever imagine. And so to say that, you know, I think it's freeing to say, well, you know, for translators who might feel like they have to have a language, you know, by the reins in order to sit down to translate it. I think it's liberating to know that that's not really the question.
I think if I can add to what you have said very well already, Michelle and Andres, is that sometimes the more you know, if you know everything about a language, your doors are shut. You have a hard time to let in the language when it's changing and different. Whereas, I mean, one thing that I have learned from my own encounters with language is to let language change me, and to let language teach me. And sometimes teaching is unlearning. And I always think of this, you know, manejo un idioma, manejo un lenguaje is kind of like, I always think of that as like I manhandle the language, or I can, you know, I can grab onto it, and it's like Andres is too elegant to drive a car. It's kind of like I can grab onto the steering wheel and see where the car takes me, and is more like it. But it's to hear the sounds in the words, to recognize the sounds, to see the commonalities, to watch language changing in front of my eyes when I read Ajens' poems, and when it's an amazing kind of experience.
I know that Rachel has a question, and Rachel, you can feel free to ask by turning on your mic.
Okay, I just unmuted me. Is that correct? Oh,
Yes.
it worked. There's a little button down in the corner. Anyway, here's the question, and it is addressed in part really to both of the people here as poets. That is, Andres most emphatically is, and Erín most emphatically is. And the question is, some of the implications of what you're doing seem to involve a poetics of polylingualities, that is, polylinguality in the plural. And that, or you could say a politics of philology, a poetics of philology, which is not as user-friendly in my view, but it is a possibility. And it seems as if this is an underground, in many ways, post-nationalism, but we're not really post-nationalism. So it's a fraught zone. And every once in a while it's tried, but it's ambiguous, at least. Maybe because the people were trying for mastery, and I'm thinking of Eliot and Pound, not necessarily happily, but I am considering that. And I want to know whether, in your opinion, there are other zones in which a poetics of polylingualisms is active. And furthermore, this is a very long question in terms of implications. What are the preconditions for it? And what are the implications in both positive and negative senses? Because the positive negative is because I don't have I don't personally have an experience of indigenous languages. I think of them as not lesser, I mean, less learned, less known, even by people who are, educated. They may know a few words or something. But at the same time, Andres, you often put in indigenous languages and allusions in the same zone with things that might be understood better because they're more familiar for no other reason. And so the question of implications, positive and negative, as well as education, fascinates me in what you're doing, because it's a very radical book. And other things like this, like things that Erín has done, are very radical conceptually for us. So I wonder whether there's any thought about that after this experience and after the achievement that you've made.
Andrés, did you want to say something first, or?
I can't understand all of that Rachel said.
I could sort of translate it half in French, but not really. I mean, you could.
I can also say something before Andrés, and then Andrés might have an idea or be able to see where he can fill in or alter what I have to say. I think that my limited experience, that the relationship in the South Americas, that between the various indigenous languages, and maybe some more than others, and the Spanish colonial language, is there's more chances of things, especially in the present tense, being intertwined. I mean, there you can go to I remember when I was in Chile in 2013 where was I? In Brazil at another conference. Anyways, where somebody was asking me, who are the indigenous writers in Canada? And so I said, well, they're named, some of them, and I says, but they write in English or in French. And the person asked me, no, who are the writers writing in their language? And I was like, well, it hasn't been the case. It's starting. I mean, I know now in poetry, people do start to use Cree words and use Anishinaabe words and use Mi'kmaq words in and phrases and expressions and things in poetry. It's starting to happen. But 10 years ago, it was not. Things were still split off. And Andrés, who has a very rigorous philological education in both Spanish and in French, reads and respects that the views of writing and the views of what is the poem, what is literature, that come to him where he lives from the world experience, the life experience and language experience of Aymara or Quechua peoples. And I mean, it's one of the things that he talks about in the essays, is just that that America is an invention, and that literature is a very recent invention by Europeans, and just come to the Americas, and say, oh, the indigenous people don't have literatures, is completely false, and the notions of literature are different. And Andrés gives those notions and those texts, those historical texts, the same attention as a philologist that he would give to a text in Europe, Mallarmé or Celan or somebody like that. So we have him breaking down texts and expressions to look at the parts of them right in the poem, He's doing it right in the poem, and making them come alive, and also making them disrupt the colonial tongue. They disrupt the Spanish tongue.
So would you say he's almost inventing a poetic language in that particular?
Well, I think he's listening and inscribing. I don't what he's listening to. He's, like, you can't invent something that somebody else already invented. And so he's working with these inscriptions and counter inscriptions. And one of the ways of dislodging or decentering the Spanish version, the colonial version of the story, is to go back to the texts by indigenous or by mixed indigenous people who started to write stuff in the 1600s, were writing things. Did you want to add to that, Andres?
Mm,
You don't have
yes,
to.
there are a lot of things to say. On the one hand, there are a lot of text in Quechua, in Aymara, in the 16th or 17th or 18th centuries. And some of these languages there are millions of people who are talking now.
Right.
Then it's not, it's like more than maybe Galician,
Oh yes.
in the case of Quechua. Then the situation is completely different to United States or Canada. About the poetical, the challenging of poetical translation. In the beginning was translation, of course. No, in the beginning was translucination, the word that came to try to interrupt, to stop some received idea of translation. That preserved, but the word became problematic in the way because it preserved the trance of transportation or comparable or stabilized means to another stabilized meaning. And the luminosity of the sense, translucination, the luminosity of the meaning, then it became increasingly problematic. Then the trust was imposed on me. Prefix trust, translucination, which this prefix that do not exist in English, and in Spanish indicate the après-coup. The après-coup of the luminosity of meaning. Translucination to mark, among other things, that we enter in a rather dark area in the light of a black sun, perhaps without laws known, and where the laws of translucine have to be invented or founded each time. And if not law, reference points as more or less responder points of indecidability. And yes, I say, who can deny that So-Lair Storm as trans cine is also a kind of answer, a kind of poetical response.
Vanessa has a question. Oh, yes, very good. I know Vanessa wants to ask a question. Feel free to do it with your mic.
Hi, thank you everyone, and thank you Andrés and Erín. Fantastic. I wanted to pick up on that a little bit what we were talking about and ask, this impossible. Erín, I'm so impressed that you translated this, but in a way it's like it needed to be translated too. But I wanted to ask about how one goes about you were both speaking about being in language, not mastering language, right? Having language in a way use you rather than you use it. But I was wondering actually if it's languages in this case, it's always in the plural.
Oh, yes.
So because it's always in the plural, how did you decide? Because I noticed you didn't translate anything that wasn't in Spanish, and in Spanish you didn't translate anything that wasn't, for example, you didn't translate Gracias a la Vida, the name of the song, right? So I was thinking about your process there, because you kept the German, you kept the French, you kept the Aymara, the Quechua, and so on. And I mean, you also preface this saying that it wasn't an experimental translation, which could have looked at what if you translated into English just the Aymara, right? It could have produced an entirely different. So I'm wondering about how one goes about this, and second, what that might say about both of your poetics, right? In existing between languages. Because translation has a way of making decisions for us, right? And so I was hoping you might reflect on that, Erín, and then I don't know if Andrés, you have something to add to this, to the very question that this raises for poetics, no?
Well, I think that for me, this is a really important question that you're asking, Vanessa. It's because it affects all of translation, and it means that as a translator, I must be willing to work while the text is destabilizing me, without trying to restabilize the text, so that I can simply get out of the problem and not fall over and hurt my knee while I'm talking and eating a sandwich, kind of thing. But I have to be in that kind of language where you're in a room and you don't always understand everything that everybody is saying. Like it's and I can't, if I translate the Aymara too into English and everything's just in English, that's like into the big melting pot of English. That's like total colonization to me. And I've learned that too because of translating from Galician and translating, for example, José Luis Mendes Ferring from Galician, who has poems where he speaks of using the words in Galician because it's scary to the Spanish to hear the sound of the words. Well, I can't translate those words. He's saying that the sound of these words is important. The presence of these words is important. So I have to, if I agree with him, if I accept what he's saying in the poem, I have to leave the words there and then find some other way to maybe tell people what those words mean. But the sounds have to be there. We have to get used to receiving words that maybe we don't understand, or sounds that we don't understand. And I see this big Levinas and his being able to accept that the stranger is not the neighbor. The neighbor we already know, or we think we know. The stranger comes to us and they're going to say something, and we have to allow the space for that to be said. And so that this, in this kind of polylingual situation, that's in the poem, that's what I see happening. I mean, Andres brings words and poets from different languages into Spanish to try to push on Spanish, you know, and to push on how we can see Spanish, this colonial tongue. And I mean, sometimes the words he brings in are translated into Spanish from French, but it's there's always a kind of pushing to see. We don't Spanish. He doesn't naturalize Spanish as well. We just talk in it, and everybody else can talk in it or be quiet. You know, it's so I don't know. I don't know if I'm making things
No,
clearer
no.
or muddier. Andres?
Gracias, Vanessa. This question is always going near all of people who try to translate poetically. The question is translation, or the name you give to us to this is cognition, supposed cognition, what cognition, supposed decision, or is inevitable a decision-making process. The cognition, of course, how the great philosopher, French philosopher, Aznavour said, il faut savoir. Il faut savoir, mais je ne pense pas. Bon, we must know the most possible, and try to decide the most possible. But cognition is infinite, and the decision must be taken without a lot of information. And usually, we don't decide. The word came itself. That is, we found and not decide to put this or this phrases. But il faut savoir. The most possible.
Thanks, Andres. That's great. Thank you.
I think we would have time for another question if anyone would like to ask with the mic, or we can close the conversation and say goodbye for the evening. Thank you all so much for being here. Feel free to post thoughts in the chat, or jump in and say goodbye or hello.
Or just turn on your microphone and say.
Yeah, and just wave.
Or your camera back on if you want. Thank you everybody for coming. I see so many friends and supporters and people who love translation. And people I translated. That's wonderful. Thank you everybody for coming, and from all over the place. And Tanya there was writing in the notes from Mexico, and it's been a pleasure, and I'm just so happy to have this book of Andres via my quirks in the world, and I hope you will speak about it to people and encourage them to read it. We read too little from South America, and when we do read things, it's quite often things that fit in with our already existing framework of what literature is. So we miss people like Andres. So please speak about the work. Thank you.
Yes.
And to order this book, Jared, do you want to say a few last words about getting the book? This is.
Can I just jump in for one moment?
Oh, yes.
I just want to jump in and congratulate Jared and whoever the book designer is here, because it is a gorgeous book that really prepares one for what's inside. The cover is perfect.
Thank you. All credit goes to Erín. She was very active and vocal and very helpful in designing and sharing the vision for the book, which as an editor is always a delight. So thank you. Yeah, I don't really have anything else to say besides gratitude and just how inspiring this conversation and the readings were. I'm so very grateful to be just really a small part of putting this book out and making sure, or hoping to make sure that it gets into the hands of readers. So thank you to Andrés and Erín and Sonia and Michelle for your wonderful introduction, and help moderating the event. I'm happy to keep the Zoom open if folks want to chat and hang out. That's a possibility as well. If not, we can say goodnight. Whatever everyone likes.
Quería saludar a todos los que vinieron esta tarde. Hello to all the people who came this evening. Y un agradecimiento especial, bueno, a Erín, a Michelle, a Sonja, Jared, Michelle, ya dije. Estuvo muy linda la sesión. Beautiful session.
Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you.
Bye, folks.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you all, everyone. Have a good night. Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah.
Bye, Jared. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank
That
you.
was really great. And thanks, Sonja, too. That was really great. Thanks for
This was
accompanying me.
amazing.
It really was. Yeah. And my goodness, this conference, where you had met Andrés for the first time, with Christoph Tarkos and Andrés. Oh my goodness, I couldn't even imagine.
Yeah, no, it was pretty incredible. That reading was a very big moment. A big moment in a person's life. The other thing is that I got to hear Andrés reading his poetry. I got to hear Andrés' poetry before I ever saw it. Because it was only the next day that I saw that Andrés had given Lisa a copy of his book.
Wow. Remarkable. And Michelle Diggy as well. Wow.
Yeah.
I remember this situation, Erín reading before or after Michelle Diggy, two style completely different for me, at least. And Erín was moving, and each time that she said in the poem, "You," I think that he was indicated to me. It was a paranoid, critical moment, but it was very. I remember always this reading of Guy and Michelle Erín.
But I was so nervous, of course, because I don't know how they drew my name out of a hat to read with Michelle Diggy in the last reading of the conference. Also because now it's like, geez, there's just my friends around me here. Because I'm actually shy in person, and if I'm in a group, I sometimes sometimes I can perform and say lots of things, and then sometimes I'm quiet. And with all these amazing poets who were at this conference, I was just kind of, you know, amazed and just listening. I wasn't really the kind of person to run up to people and start buttonholing them or whatever. I just wanted to listen to the poems and absorb them. And
but it's funny how you find each other in these moments. You know,
yeah,
the serendipity that maybe both of you were probably in a similar hunker inside when you found each other.
yeah. But it
Really
was interesting too, because as I say, it was kind of like that nobody said there would be a poet from Chile. It was like there's a French poet, and it's like he's a French poet, and then
I
he
was
started.
presented as a poet.
That's so funny.
A great story, because I arrived with some French poet, important French poet, because some of my poems were in a poetic magazine who appeared in France, and they invited all French poets in this magazine, but all were French poets. But I think that Widobro, again,
Yeah, Widobro.
came, he wanted to be a French poet.
Yeah.
He never was said French poet.
Yeah. Wow.
And you were just anointed as a French poet at that moment.
Yeah, well,
It
you
was so
were a
easy for
French
you.
poet. There you were. It was easy for you. But then he starts to read it. I'm like, that's not French. Reading it. Why is he reading his French poems in Spanish? I realized these are not French poems, Erin. Anyways, that was quite something. That event, I feel one of those life-changing events, really.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
With a poetry and yeah.
To be speechless at a poetry conference, right?